Hi everybody. How was the break? Amazing. Thank you for being here. It's amazing I was just telling Natalie that it's great for an event like this to happen because it's actually forcing people to come out of their office libraries or whatever they are and actually physically meet people and interact, which is amazing and it's great. And I wanted to say a big thank you to the Effie MENA team and Communicate and MediaQuest team for actually putting something like this together because it's actually forcing us to interact. I just saw a couple of the planners that I used to work with and it was amazing, and some old colleagues that are here, so it's good to see everybody kind of interacting again. Just a quick kind of note, I work with WPP Wunderman Thompson and I manage the global business of Nestlé worldwide. Before the pandemic, my job was essentially to be on the plane and to go to all the global markets, and physically I was on an airplane for about 3 weeks out of the month. Post the pandemic, I'm doing a lot of things virtually. So that's been a massive shift, and there's a lot of kind of pros and cons. Someone was asking me, what's better? Is it better to be physical or is it better to be virtual? And how do you see the future? And I said, I think the future needs to be about choice, and it needs to be about a balance of everything. So I don't think you should go back to the way you used to work because I think that was also not healthy, but I think it's a balance of everything. They asked me about the session content today, and they were asking me essentially, what do I want to talk about? They asked us 3 questions prior to kind of putting the agenda together in terms of what are the 3 attributes that marketeers of today need to have post the pandemic. And I basically spoke about 3 things. I spoke about perspective because I think the best marketeers, especially in the post-pandemic, need to have perspective in terms of the way they need to evolve and shift. I spoke about empathy because I think empathy is absolutely critical. There's been a couple of comments and there was a couple of sessions that I was hearing about brands being human. So I think marketers of the future need to have empathy to be able to create human brands. And of course, it's all about humility. And humility is all about how do you build a sense of purpose into the brands and marketing that you do. So essentially everything that I talk about today is going to be touching upon these 3 areas. And there's going to be 10+1 strategy rules that basically are going to be outlining exactly the way that I have seen brands kind of operate post the pandemic. Just before we start, can you spot how many F's you can find in this sentence? I'll give you 30 seconds.
3,
4,
5,
How many say 5? How many say 4?
6,
5, 6, 7.
6. The answer is 6. This was a psychological test, by the way. I cheated because I put it on the screen. Usually it's a 30 seconds, and usually 99% of the people get it wrong because they miss the F after the of, and that's the one that people miss. And it's a good psychological test to make sure that people are alert before a presentation. And it's amazing. So whoever said 6, well done. You were focused. So what a year. We're talking about the fact that it's changed the way we work and live, right? This was the quote of the year by Google last year. Sorry, I was on mute, and I'm sure all of us are on mute most of the times, even when we don't want it. This is us, usually on conference calls, especially when the camera comes on and we're trying to hide because that's the way we look, but hopefully everyone looks very beautiful here in this crowd, so we don't have that issue. But essentially, it's really changed the way we also kind of look at things and the way we go to meetings. Someone was asking me about the whole notion of work from home. And by the way, everything that I'm presenting to you today is backed by data. It's scientific. Yes, there will be a little subjectivity to it, but most of it is based on data. They asked, and this is mostly in North America, but I'm sure from a stat perspective, it will probably be the same here. They asked a bunch of people that are working whether they want to go back to work or not. And essentially, a lot of the people, the maximum majority, they said that they actually prefer to work from home. And I think that the question was asked from me in terms of what do I think the ideal scenario for the future would be? And I said, I think it's about choice. I don't think it's ideal for us to be able to force people to go back to work because I think there's some positives in terms of the virtual work environment. So I think it's about choice and it's about actually creating that balance for the future. And I think that all the companies and agencies and employers need to adopt this. it's also changed the way we look at ourselves from a human kind of perspective and our mannerism. When you basically Google kindness and basically the whole sense of profound gratitude, there's more people saying thank you, and more people kind of being kind right now on the internet versus before the pandemic, right? So it's actually made us to be better people than what we were before, right? And that's a positive, and that's why I'm saying it's always a plus and minus on everything. We value people more, right? We spend more time with our kids. We're trying to eat better. We're trying to take care of ourselves. I, for one, I never used to see my kids at all because I was constantly traveling and flying. I've had the privilege to actually spend a lot more time with my kids. So I think for me, at least, that was a positive. So I think, you got to look at the plus side in terms of, what it means. There was a study that was done by WPP Wunderman Thompson, and it spoke about the fact that, first off, this has not been our first pandemic, right? It hasn't been our first barbecue. There's been many, many pandemics before that. 16 or 17 kind of recessions combined with pandemics before that. And basically the way they were looking at this pandemic is essentially they were looking at it in comparison to the Renaissance. The Renaissance was an event that happened in the 15th, 16th century post the Black Plague, if you recall those days. And it basically led into the biggest kind of transformation. It basically paved the way to capitalism. And a lot of the art scene, and I don't know if any of you have read the book Medici Effect, but if you read the Medici Effect and the Medici family in terms of the Renaissance and how they transformed the art business and the business environment, that's essentially what happened. A lot of things changed, commerce changed, trade changed, the way markets were being kind of directed changed, and essentially it's the exact same thing that's happening today. So essentially what we're going through from an analogy perspective is the Renaissance, exactly what happened during the 15th to 16th century. And it's also about pivot moments, right? Every single brand that has been successful, whether it's been during a pandemic or outside of the pandemic, has basically decided consciously to pivot and change the way they're doing business, change the way their focus has been. All these brands were not what they became and what you know them as right now, because there was something different. And basically because of this pivot strategy that they took, they changed the entire kind of business spectrum, and they basically offered a new brand to the world. How many people know what Nokia was before they became a mobile company? Any guesses? Nokia was a paper company. It was a paper mill. How many people know what Wrigley was before they sold bubblegum? Wrigley was a soap company. Mr. Wrigley used to sell soap in a department store. But because people were not buying soap, he decided to also give a free gum to anyone that buys soap. He realized after a while that the gum was selling more than the soap, so he transformed and he shifted his entire business to becoming a gum and basically a bubblegum factory. So again, a lot of these brands, historically, Suzuki was in the business of silk before it moved to kind of selling motorcycles, etc., etc., etc. Nintendo, by the way, had a hotel company. They were selling kind of, there was a taxi company that they had. So again, the whole point here is that pivoting for brands, and when you're forced to actually change your perspective, is actually a positive thing. And essentially, the whole point here is foundations of pivoting start with the ambition to deliver an exceptional brand experience. And I'll get into the brand experience versus customer experience kind of story shortly. But I think it's very, very important for us to keep that in mind. So essentially, what I'm going to talk to you about, similar to that whole exercise of how many F's can you find, because it's all about the details. You forget one detail and you miss the wrong answer, or you get the wrong answer. Essentially, these are 10+1 strategy rules, very, very basic thing. They're not rocket science. And essentially, the way I'm looking at the way positive brands and important brands and successful brands have adopted themselves post the pandemic. They are also a combination of left brain logic and right brain principles, as I call it, right? So it's as much about the product as it is about values and behavior. So it's a perfect balance between all of them. And everything that you see has that perfect balance between left brain and right brain. Number one, and I think most of you that have worked with me and know me have probably heard me talk about this, but this is never more true than it is today. don't ever forget the why. And the golden circle, the Simon Sinek classic golden circle in terms of people buy why you do it versus what you do, that's absolutely critical. It is very, very important for people to make sure that that purposeful kind of drive that they have at the center of what they're actually doing is clear. So the why is absolutely critical today, more than ever before, because that's what people are driven and people are actually adopting. Number two, we talk about this, and I was talking to this with Natalie in the past, that customers today basically must sit at the heart of your marketing strategy. That was basically a notion that kind of brands kind of were adopting. But today, the whole notion is that customers might sit at the heart of your customer journey. And there's a big, big difference between that, right? It's about how do you actually look, so going from what people kind of think when they're actually asked about what your brand is, versus what people actually remember about your brand throughout their moments and their journey throughout the day. So an absolutely critical element to make sure that your brand makes a purposeful, basically, act through the moments of their life. Truth number three, marketing begins with knowing your customer. The new truth is that marketing begins with knowing the customer segment and the persona specifically, right? These two people could technically be part of the same old demographic, but from a intent, from the way they look at things, from the way they are buying brands in the market, they're completely different. So they might be part of a kind of similar segment, but from a persona perspective, they're quite different. Ernst & Young, by the way, did a research. This screen is so massive, you can't even look at it. So Ernst & Young did a research based on basically attributes that people are wanting during the pandemic. And basically it clubbed them into 5 areas. It clubbed them to affordability. So some people are looking for affordability more than anything else in terms of their interaction with brands. Some are looking at health, so they're very health conscious. They're looking at health as the first driver for their purchases. They're looking at planet. You have a lot of kind of planet conscious people, they look at sustainability. How sustainable is my brand today? And if that brand is sustainable, I'm going to buy it, right? They look at society first, and I will talk to you about this. How important is that brand and what contribution is that brand making to society? That's a massive driver. And last but not least, it's about the experience. What experience am I getting out of it? So unless you're focusing on these 5 attributes, by the way, and this is research that they've done across almost 15,000 people, and it's a global research. So a lot of the customers, and I'm sure a lot of you right now sitting in this audience, probably fit in one of these kind of boxes, more or less, right? You might have 2 of them, but essentially, unless you look at what drives a customer from a segmentation perspective, you won't be able to do proper marketing with them. BX before CX. And I talk about this a lot because being customer-centric is important, right? And there's a lot of books around it. So I'm not saying don't be customer-centric. And a lot of people talk about, CX being important and etc. But I think if you forget your BX, which is your brand experience, you will lose that resonance that actually made you famous and made you proper right from the beginning. So if you start listening to the customer more and more, you start losing that edge. There's 2 examples here. One example is IKEA. One example is Apple, right? There is a theory that they call for IKEA that basically they call it the grand masters of the effort paradox. It's absolutely horrible going into an IKEA, and I'm sure most of you have. You want to go nuts at the end. It takes a lot of effort for you to actually put that kind of product together, right? You put a lot of effort. But they've realized that because they're the masters of the effort paradox, if you put effort into something, you kind of have an emotional bond with it, right? You don't want to ever throw that chair out that you've made for your son because you feel like, I put a lot of effort into it, right? It's not, if you had asked the customers whether they like it or not to actually spend 9 hours assembling a chair, they would have said, no, we don't want it, just give me a real thing. So essentially, the edge that they have is that they've gone against that and they've looked at how their brand can be successful. Similar to Apple, right? Apple basically has that theory of being the grand masters of creating a barriers of exit. If you own an Apple product, you're fucked, excuse my French. You can't get out of it, right? You're stuck in that whole element of, how do I change my iTunes, my Apple Pay, etc. It's all kind of a connected ecosystem. So if they wanted to basically be customer centric, they would have probably created a much easier product, right? And these are classic entrepreneurs, classic people that basically say exactly that, right? They're the epitome of what I'm talking about. If you get a chance, by the way, I always recommend books in these types of presentations because it's important. If you get a chance, read this book by Adam Ferrier. He's basically a behavioral scientist, right? And he talks about exactly what I was saying, was that if you listen to the customer, you would start losing your brand edge. And you don't want to do that where in today's world, you're trying to create a differentiation for your brand amongst everyone else. So you want to make sure that your BX is constantly in the forefront, right? So Adam Ferrier, look it up. Stop listening to your customer. Number 5, I think Nadim was talking about this when I just joined the session, and he was talking about basically lifetime value. I think you spoke about LTV, and I loved it. And I said I'm talking about that because I think in today's world, I think it's important for us to talk about experience. By the way, this is one of the examples of one of our global WPP agency, AKQA, which I'm sure most of you know. And basically, they're behind the Nike Club. And it's all about how do you shift over time a brand to go from being commodity driven to being experience driven and to being ultimately a transformation business. And transformation business is all about how do you create a journey. It's not about the moments, it's a loop, right? It's all about how do you collect data. How do you basically collect that first party data, which is absolutely critical to be able to kind of, constantly kind of have a looped conversation. So going from experiences to transformation is the thing that brands must adopt today. And a lot of great brands are actually doing it by creating experiences that are more looped, which then turn and are called transformation, right? So going from experience to transformation. By the way, if there is a lot of these things that you guys, I know time is short on today's session, 45 minutes, but if there's any questions on this, we can then kind of, have a dialogue, whether it's on LinkedIn or any other format that you want. Truth number 6, relationship matter. New truth, promises are all you have. And this is again backed up by research. Today, basically, they're saying that a lot of the customers today globally are watching how your brand is behaving. What promises are you keeping for them to be able to build their future loyalty and relationship with you, right? So it's an absolutely critical element for you to make sure that, nothing is more attractive of keeping your promise and doing the right thing. Absolutely critical. And the big brands and the successful brands have understood this. Number 7, brands serve the customer or the consumer. New truth, brands must serve communities as well, right? Great brands in the world, and I did a little piece during the pandemic last year because I was a bit pissed off with all the brands that were trying to actually kind of do the right thing, but they were using it for gimmicks. And it's very shameful because instead of helping what was happening during the pandemic, it was all about, let me change my logo and kind of, make it social distancing. I think that's bullshit. I think the real brands were the ones that were actually saying, what, if I have been selling for 50 years to my customers, and if I know that the community right now is in distress, it's my time for me to stop the gimmicks, stop the bullshit, and actually go out there and advertise and actually act kindly and go out there. And there's a lot of brands that have done it right, and there's a lot of brands that have done it wrong. And I think they should be called out for that. And I'm not saying it's just Nestlé, I'm any other brand. Number 8, purpose. Very controversial topic. There was a CMO, I'm not going to mention the brand, so I won't get in trouble from the WPP front, but there was a fast food company CMO that put a statement out about 3 weeks ago. I'm sure he's going to get fired very soon. And he talked about the fact that purpose is bullshit, and the purpose of brands is to make a profit, which is absolutely appalling. And this is a global CMO of a fast food company, okay? I think it's probably the most important element that you have. Brands today need to have an ethical scoreboard, as I call it, right? They need to have an ethical scoreboard. They need to do the right thing. They need to have a purpose that serves something bigger. And that purpose needs to be simple. It needs to be relatable. It needs to be about your brand. Answer this question. I'm not going to read it. Answer the question. Which brand do you think designed these shoes? What is it? C? A? A? Logically A, right? Fits, right? Nike did it. It was the fucking biggest flop in the world, right? It was an eco shoe. They did this a couple of years ago. It was a sustainable kind of shoe. It flopped. It flopped because of the fact that the way they packaged it, you know, the resonance to the brand was missing. They didn't really bridge it properly, right? People didn't believe it. Nike is not about kind of creating a sustainable shoe that looks like shoes for hobbits. You know, that's not what they do. But it flopped. So what I'm saying is it's very, very important to make sure that if you're getting into something, it fits your purpose and it fits that core DNA that you have. And by the way, this is not just me saying. Kantar is one of our sister agencies, and I'm sure most of you know Kantar. It's the biggest research and consumer insight company in the world. There's no one bigger than Kantar. And they talk about research and they talk about the fact that make sure that your purpose is genuine, make sure that your purpose makes sense, and make sure that your purpose fits the brand. This is Kantar talking. And they actually have scientific elements that brands that actually do this grow 6 times more than brands that don't, right? So again, research. And by the way, if anyone wants these stats, I can share it later with the team, and they can kind of share it with you because it's public. So, and this is the company CEO that I work with. This is Mark Schneider. He's the global CEO of Nestlé, and he has a beautiful quote about consumers are putting more and more emphasis on environmental stewardship and transparency. Ignore their needs, and they will ignore your products, right? Nestlé is the biggest food and water company in the world. If they have understood that, trust me, smaller companies need to understand that as well, right? It's not a joke. And again, when I was talking about sustainability, by the way, you need to make sure when you talk about these important topics, you make it contextual because people don't understand it. When you talk about greenhouse emissions, by the way, which one of these products do you think has the biggest greenhouse emission out of all of them? Who said burger? Okay, anything else? Okay, fantastic. The correct answer is burger. So whoever said burger, well done. So burger has the highest kind of greenhouse, so basically, essentially, your footprint's kind of higher with a burger than anything else. By the way, I was really happy to see wine, one of the lowest, because I love wine, so I thought maybe I can drink more of it. So I'm actually doing well, you know, if you drink wine. So continue to drinking wine if you're a wine drinker. But the whole point here is to make sure that you put things in context, right? Contextualize these things. This usually things like kind of, you know, sustainability and making sure you go net zero. These are very, very, very complex kind of topics, right? But when you contextualize it, when you start explaining to people, right? What is that burger? So if you eat a burger throughout once a week throughout the year, right? The effect of it is this. Right? So if you start putting it in context of consumer language, that's how you basically turn the curve, right? So start making these things contextual. It's much, much better and it's much more effective. Number 9, 2 more to go. This talks about mental well-being, right? This is probably the most important element that brands, marketeers, companies need to talk about, right? The whole notion of anxiety, mental fatigue, physical fatigue and physical anxiety, etc. So the topic and the notion of mental well-being is an important element. And I think you used to have people who said that I don't have the credentials to talk. I'm selling chocolate. I can't talk about mental well-being. Yes, you do. You know, I'm selling tissue paper. How can I talk about mental well-being? Yes, you can. So I think it's about how do you change the context of your conversation, which is very, very important, right? So the notion of mental well-being today is very key, and you need to have a conversation, and you need to tell your customer how important it is for them to stay fit. By the way, an article that came out, I think last week, and I took this screen grab of it from Harvard Business Review, right? It talks about the fact, and if any of you are here, if you want to take a couple of things, take out of this presentation, take this, okay? It talks scientifically. They're saying that employees that have hobbies, marketeers that have hobbies are much more successful doing their jobs versus the ones that they don't. Why? Because if you have a hobby, imagine I play piano badly, but I'm trying to practice more and more, right? When I'm behind a piano versus behind my computer or talking to an audience, I'm putting myself in the consumer's shoe because I'm trying to write a melody. Now then I'm thinking, this type of music, how is the audience, if I'm going to play it for a bunch of friends, how are they going to think about it? You know, are they going to like it? Are they going to hate it? Are they going to walk out? You start putting yourself in the shoes of the consumer, right? So it makes you more contextual. That's why they're saying if you have hobbies, if you're doing something for yourself, it makes you a better marketeer because you start looking at it from a third eye and look at it from a consumer perspective. So if you don't have a hobby, adopt a hobby because it will make your job better. That's essentially what it is. Number 10, experiences are not only done by brands, experiences are created, or that transformation is created with people together, you know? And there's a lot of lovely brands today. Lego is one of my favorite because we probably have more Legos in my house than any other household because of my kids, and my little one loves it. So a lot of the strategies that a brand like Lego takes, they do it with kids, right? They co-create. And it's important because kids know what other kids want. And this has nothing to do with the point that I was saying about losing your kind of listening to the customer. There's a balance. But what I'm saying is co-creating something with your customer, I think is important because it makes a better fitting experience. Am I moving? Is that good?
No,
He's going nuts because I keep moving around. Last point. And this is an important element. I have spent the past 2 years, more than 2 years. So I'm trying to obtain a degree in inclusive design. And I'm working with a lot of kind of design thinking folks. It's partially psychology, partially about behavioral economics, and partially about inclusivity, right? And the reason I've done that is that my little guy, Alex, is autistic. So Alex is autistic. And when you have a kid that is autistic, you need to transform the way you look at things. You need to transform the way you live at the house, and you actually kind of live outside of the house. So this has forced me to actually get into this whole notion of why it's important for brands today, brands that we are working with, to have an inclusive strategy, right? So brands should be for everyone. And it's an important element, and I talk about it. Yes, it's related to diversity, equity, inclusivity, but I want to talk about inclusivity a little because a lot of the great brands today have actually understood that, and they're trying to create brands that are for everyone, right? That is kind of reaching everyone. By the way, the top one is a product that we created as Wunderman Thompson 2 years ago, and it also went to Cannes. It's real work, by the way. It's not bullshit work, it's real work. We worked with Tommy Hilfiger to create the first line of clothing for people that have autism. Because when you have an autistic person, sometimes they have a little bit of a kind of issue with motor skills. You know, they focus a little kind of less when it comes to the buttons. So everything that was created on this clothing line was done with basically magnetic cues, right? So when you put your buttons on, it connects. You don't have to put the button in because it's difficult for kids. Same scenario that was done recently with Unilever. And by the way, Alan Jope, who's the global CEO of Unilever, I don't know if there's any Unilever folks here in the crowd, but he basically funded this project. So they've created with Rexona the first ever deodorant that is for people with disability, right? This is people with disability. They did research where they couldn't handle the deodorant. So it's the first ever kind of prototype that was created for about 10,000, and now they will go into mass production. And this is not to say that, you know, people are feeling sorry for people that have inclusivity issue. And I'm sure people have seen this example that was done about 5-6 months ago, right? Nike, the Nike Fly. And by the way, this was actually done, a guy who has cerebral palsy. He wrote to the CEO. It took him like a year of back and forth, etc. And they created the first shoe that for people that have cerebral palsy that they can't. So you know you can just kind of fit your foot in there, and it just goes in and out. So again, the brands that are successful have understood this notion. This is not a joke or a kind of good to have anymore. This is my creative partner, who's also the global chief creative officer of Wunderman Thompson, and I work with Baz on a day-to-day basis. And he talks about this whole notion of the holy trinity of creativity, technology, and humanity, and he's a big supporter of it. And he says that basically, you know, the combination of these three areas has got us out of a lot of troubles, and if we continue on this path, it will get us on, in positive pavements. 4 books that I want to recommend if you get a chance. One is Alchemy by a guy called Rory Sutherland, who is the creative chairman of Ogilvy in the UK, a lovely guy. If you get a chance, please read that book. David and Goliath, which I'm sure most of the people here, if they've known me, they're probably, maybe I've lended that to them, or they've heard about it. But David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell is a great story that talks about the underdog and how great brands that are underdogs will always succeed because they are the underdogs. There is a lady called Brene Brown, and she talks about the power of vulnerability, right? A lot of us in this room might be vulnerable. If you haven't read her books, if you haven't read, go on TEDx and type in Brene Brown, and she talks about the power of vulnerability. Phenomenal. She's got kind of audiences in the millions. And she talks about the fact that people that are courageous are also the most vulnerable, right? If you're vulnerable, you're courageous, and it also impacts creativity. And last but not least, there's a book called Think Like a Designer, Don't Act Like One. There's a chapter in there specifically that talks about the hot dog formula. The hot dog formula was a formula that was created by IKEA. I'm going to use IKEA as the last thing. Nobody likes to go to IKEA. You're pissed off. The lines are long. You got boxes. You have to wait for an hour or two. But what's the best part about IKEA? When you come out, you can get an ice cream for $1, or you get a hot dog for, very kind of minimal amount. And the whole point is, if you end a journey on a high with a great customer experience, at the end, you always have the customer coming back. So they've called it the hot dog formula because you always get a very kind of, low budget hot dog at the end, and people look forward to that little shitty hot dog, and it's not really great, but hey, you love it because you've come out of a kind of a really, really bad experience. So if you get a chance, please buy these books and be positive. This is a poster that it was in Art Dubai. I loved it. I took a picture of it. That, it's all on the rise. It won't be like this forever. I think the fact that we're all sitting here today and we're interacting, I think it's an amazing thing, and I think we should do more of it and come out more. And to the gentleman that was asking me whether I prefer virtual or physical, I prefer physical because it's better. You come and you meet people, and I met Akriti. I haven't met her for such a long time, and I'm seeing her. So it was amazing. So no, I think the balance is good. Thank you for your time. Thank you for giving me the time. I hope you liked it. And I think we're on time, no?
Yes.
Good.